Welcome to the video tutorial on installing and configuring ownCloud on Windows 11 computer. With this guide you can build your own cloud storage and access it from anywhere. The video mainly uses the command line, but that doesn't mean it's difficult to do. Just follow the steps I did to have your own cloud storage. I'll leave instructions in the description. Let's get started. On your Windows 11 computer, you install Windows Subsystem for Linux, are also known as WSL. After restarting Windows as requested, go to the Microsoft Store and install Ubuntu version 20.04. When you run Ubuntu, the above error will appear and you can fix it as follows. You open the command window as administrator. Then you copy and paste the two commands as above. This command sets up a Windows computer to use WSL 1. Then you find and run Ubuntu. These are the setup steps when you run Ubuntu. You are required to create a new administrator account. You create an admin account as you wish. In this case I created an account with the username netvn. At this point we have completed installing Ubuntu on a Windows 11 computer. Next I installed ownCloud on Ubuntu. Before installing ownCloud I installed Apache. Apache will turn Ubuntu into a web server. You update Ubuntu and install Apache. I set up my Windows computer firewall to allow Apache through so other computers or phones can access remotely. I have completed the Apache installation. Now I install PHP on Ubuntu. ownCloud is a PHP application, so you need to install it. PHP has been successfully installed on Ubuntu. The cloud server needs a database, so you install Maria database. To ensure database security, set a root password. You set up the root password and write it down to create a new database in the next step. You choose yes for the next options. Now you create a new database for ownCloud. You use the password you just created to access the database. Here you create a new database named ownCloud. Username is ownCloud user. In the step of setting up ownCloud for the first start, you will use this information to connect to the database. I have completed creating a new database for ownCloud. Next, download the latest version of ownCloud. You download the compressed file so you unzip it. The file is extracted to a folder named www. This is the folder where my ownCloud website is stored. I set permissions to a folder called ownCloud. Next, I create a configuration file on the Apache server. The configuration file is named ownCloud.configure. You copy and paste the configuration file as above, then replace the IP address that matches your Windows computer. After completing the configuration file and saving it, enable this file. To apply the changes, you restart the web server. Now I open any browser and enter the IP address of my Windows computer. This is the ownCloud setup screen for the first startup. You create a new administrative account. Then establish a connection to the database created in the previous step. The database created in the previous step is named ownCloud. The username is ownCloud user. At this point, I have completed installing ownCloud on my Windows computer. But you can only access ownCloud on your local network, so I will take some extra steps to access it from anywhere. I set up port forwarding on the router. To do that, I set up a static IP address for my Windows computer. This is the static IP address I assigned to my Windows 11 computer. Next, I went to the router management page and set up port forwarding. On the router, I forward port 80 to the IP address assigned to the Windows computer. Most routers allow you to forward ports. Next, I set up remote ownCloud access using a public IP address. Since I use a public IP address, I changed the ownCloud configuration file settings on the web server. Instead of using a local IP address, I set up a public IP address. I restarted Apache to apply the changes. You can access ownCloud, but it is limited and you can fix it as follows. You edit the PHP configuration file to add trusted domain. This configuration file tells us that ownCloud can only be accessed using the local IP address. If I want to access ownCloud remotely, I add my public IP address here. After fixing the PHP configuration file, I can access ownCloud remotely using public IP. But want to access files and folders, you restart Apache. If you use a dynamic public IP address, it will change over time and then you cannot access ownCloud. To fix this, I set up a dynamic domain name service on my Windows computer. I used iNew Dynamic Domain Name Service. After creating a new free dynamic domain name, install the client software on your Windows computer. The client software is responsible for updating the public IP address every time it changes. Instead of using a public IP address to access ownCloud, I use a domain name. So I changed the configuration file as follows. I add the domain name in the list of trusted domains. On the web server configuration file, I replace the public IP address with the domain name. You apply changes on the cloud server by restarting Apache. Now I access ownCloud using a free domain name. I can access ownCloud from anywhere. I can upload and download data. But the storage space on the Windows installation partition is limited, and I also have a lot of other software installed. So I added another hard drive on my Windows computer and used it to store cloud data. So how to move ownCloud to a new hard drive? You follow these steps. This is the hard drive that was just added on the Windows computer. I formatted it, created a partition and named it ownCloud. The following are the steps to move ownCloud to partition D. First, I export Ubuntu to a file called ubuntu.tar. This is the file after export. I then unregistered Ubuntu 20.04. Unregistered successfully. Next, I imported Ubuntu 20.04 from the ubuntu.tar file to partition D. The import was successful and I have completed moving ownCloud to the new hard drive. I open Ubuntu and run services to use ownCloud. There are two services you must start to use ownCloud, Apache and MySQL. Make sure you allow Apache to go through the Windows firewall for remote access. Then I open any web browser and access ownCloud using the domain name. Every time I start Windows, I have to start the service manually, which is a waste of time. So in the last part of this video, I set up the services to automatically start every time Windows starts. When you start, the Ubuntu service asks you for a password. To run services without a password, do the following. You open the file named servers and add the following lines. So when you stop and start Apache and MySQL, you will not need a password. Next, open the Run window and go to the folder called Startup on Windows. Here you add a new text file. In the text file, add the commands as above. These two commands automatically run the Apache and MySQL services every time Windows starts. The file is saved with the BAT extension. This saves you from having to start the service manually. Above are the steps to install and configure ownCloud on a Windows 11 computer. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I use an Android phone and access to the cloud server via the internet. On Android, I connect to the internet using mobile data. Then I open any browser. On the browser, I enter the domain name that was set up in the previous step. The remote connection was successful. I simply logged into the cloud server and uploaded or downloaded the files. Good luck.